If you work at a coffee shop, you're allowed to make mistakes. You write down the wrong name, use the wrong milk. That happens. But what if you accidentally make someone's coffee with Windex? That's probably the end of your coffee career. But if you make a comparable mistake and you work at cable news, that all changes. Not only do you not get fired, you get promoted. You get raised, you become manager. And that's because in cable news, advancement clearly has little to do with one's achievements in providing accurate journalism. Before the US invaded Iraq, a lot of people were confused about the connection between 9/11 and Saddam Hussein. They were not connected, but it was the Bush administration's job to manufacture a connection that would make war with Iraq palatable. Well, there was no shortage of personalities willing to help out, and a lot of them are still on TV. There was a guy who tried to connect Iraq with the Oklahoma City bombing. He was on TV for years. General Barry McCaffrey, who was on the board of weapons companies, was there to cheerlead for war. He was just on TV trashing defund the police. Joe Scarborough, Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, all these people helped make war acceptable. And they've all had nice long careers. This guy was on the Today Show in 2003 talking about how every single bomb has precision accuracy and was designed not to kill civilians. Regardless of their intended design, they did kill civilians. And between 2003 and when he finally retired in 2016, my guess is that he didn't devote much energy to correcting himself. We're talking about people who were wrong about real shit every night. And people who knew it. Anecdotes about producers and pundits acknowledging the gaps in coverage and the dishonesty of their parent companies and just going forward without much or any correction, surrendering their principles as their careers progressed, recalibrating their morals to fit the parameters of their jobs. But these personalities and pundits got rewarded because producers liked their energy or because executives liked them, not even always because they got the best ratings. One of the most interesting stories in the book is of the Phil Donahue show. Donahue had the highest rated show on MSNBC, but he was anti-war, and he freaked out the executives. Keep in mind, MSNBC at the time was owned by GE. GE, among other things, manufactured engines for the F-16. They canceled his show, the highest rated show on the network. There is a blacklist. It's an unofficial one, but there are people who just aren't really welcome. Cohen talks about asking decision makers at ABC's Nightline why Daniel Ellsberg is never on. They said that the boss saw him as an extremist. The boss, not the journalists. This would indicate some level of self-censorship among network journalists, right? Which is expected. Once on the Donahue show, Ramsey Clark was on.
I've been concerned about United States military aggression and opposed to war since I got out of the Marine Corps, you might say.
Afterwards, Cohen was told that that wasn't even supposed to happen because Clark was on some sort of blacklist and shouldn't have been invited in the first place. So even more insidious is the blacklist producers and bookers are expected to construct themselves once they realize that inviting on certain people is just going to be too big of a hassle and you have to deal with management breathing down your neck. That's probably why there are people who just never get invited on TV, or used to get invited on TV but don't anymore. Thomas Frank, who wrote What's the Matter with Kansas, he used to be on TV all the time. Once he wrote Listen Liberal, his appearances dried up. Chris Hayes used to have on much more progressive voices.
And Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! We were talking about the nomination of John Brennan to head the CIA.
And he's been on lefty podcasts like Intercepted, so the only reason I can think of that he no longer has guests on like Amy Goodman or Jeremy Scahill or Thomas Frank is because it's just too big a hassle at this point. Because management really does censor and blacklist certain people, whether or not there's a physical list tacked up in a break room somewhere. And part of this fear executives have of certain guests is sponsor flight. And that is just another way advertisers have an indirect hold on corporate media. Now you might say, but I do see progressive voices on network news. Obviously, progressives are allowed on Fox when they have a critique of other Democrats. Fox puts them on in bad faith, turncoat principle, and they go on because they have no comparable platform to land on. But wait, I saw Cornel West and Michael Moore on CNN. But listen to the topics they're invited on to discuss and the language they use. They stay in bounds. Cornel West talking with Chris Hedges is very different from Cornel West talking with Anderson Cooper. Or listen to Michael Moore on MSNBC when he suggested that Michelle Obama should run for president. And then listen to his appearance on Chapo Trap House where he talks about how capitalism has failed. I'm not necessarily blaming these people. I mean, it's a positive thing they're allowed to make the appearances they are. I don't even think it's totally their fault. I mean, producers and bookers engineer it this way. It's dictated by the topics and the other guests. But look, Cornel West can be on CNN, and he can even use the word neoliberal a couple times. But if you were insistent on observing absurdities like
in 2008, when you actually have a black president, what happens then? Well, the black political class and the black professional class follows his Pied Piper, neoliberal, pro-drone, pro-massive surveillance, pro-Israeli occupation, pro-ecological devastation with drilling. Thank God for Brother Bob McKibben and the others.
That's not a conversation you're allowed to have there. And his bookings on CNN would probably dry up. Censorship and executive directives. Every day, every show on the networks cover almost the exact same things. So whatever Fox was talking about at noon, they'll probably be talking about at 8. And that's not an accident. People at Fox would get daily memos on what to cover, sometimes how to cover it, and sometimes explicitly who the good guys and who the bad guys were. One day, a memo went out warning about whining anti-war protesters complaining about civilian casualties. Obviously, they're the bad guys. And pro-war directives were not unique. After we invaded Afghanistan, CNN executives told their staff to balance images of civilian casualties with reminders that the Taliban in Afghanistan still harbors terrorists, even if, quote, it may start to sound rote. Another memo instructed anchors to repeat that the military actions are in response to 5,000 people dead after 9/11. And as a journalist, I imagine it's pretty hard to be critical of a war that your executives constantly remind you to justify in front of your audience. But maybe most insidious, the true fact about parent companies is that they do affect the coverage of their journalist employees. And they are employees. 1990, the Today Show was doing a segment on boycotts, so a producer called boycott expert Todd Putnam and asked, "What's the biggest boycott going on right now?" He said, "Well, the boycott against GE over their nuclear weapons production." GE owned NBC. The producer said, "We can't do that one." "Well, we could do that one, but we won't." Or how often do you see anchors criticizing a telecom merger? Just about never. I mean, Time Warner could be merging with Westboro Baptist Media, and Anderson Cooper would never run a segment on it. With that, I think I'm going to leave it there. This book gives a great insider's view of cable news and also kind of a glimpse into what it was like 20 years ago to be an adult watching every media network very explicitly manufacturing consent for the war in Iraq and effectively conflating it with 9/11. So, thanks for watching, subscribe if you learned something, and now I give you Bowtie Tucker, Tucker Classic.
I think if a candidate got up and said, you know what, I'm an inside-the-box thinker. I'm a product of the Beltway, and I'm proud of it. Because in fact, in Washington, we know how the government works, and we know what's best for you.
Right.
And we're going to do it regardless of what you think.
If somebody was
I'd
running
vote for that
you,
guy.
would you go to a neurosurgeon that says, I have absolutely no experience in doing any of this?
That's exactly
Would you
right.
go to a lawyer if you want
That's right. You know,
life?
my sink is broken, but I don't think I need like a plumber to fix it.
Right.
We get one of our producers, or maybe our director, maybe he can do it. You know, because ultimately, we all have value as people. You know what I mean?
Even people in the Beltway.
I hate that shit, actually.